Drew here, and the Master Beta, the fourth episode of Pam and Tommy, is kind of aptly titled because I think this episode you see Tommy and Pam obsessed with tracking down the tape, but it doesn't matter. And I think that that's one of the more interesting aspects of this show is that people don't really understand what they're dealing with. You see this on both ends of the story, both with Pam and Tommy, and with Rand Gautier and Uncle Manty. But you see it particularly in the fact that Tommy and Pam, they're trying to track down this tape. They've hired a private investigator. They're convinced that if they can just get their hands on this tape, they can, kind of end this situation. But the realization you see gradually dawning on Pamela, more than Tommy this episode, is that it doesn't matter, because even if you track down the master beta, even if you get that original tape, this has been disseminated to so many people and they're just going to keep making copies and copies. There's no putting the cat back in the bag. And it's interesting to go back to a time when people were so unfamiliar with the internet and how, putting things out there works, that they could even for a moment think that this could be something that you could just end, that you would just find the tape and stop it from going any further. Because, we all grew up in the social media generation, or at least people my age did, where you just know if you put something out there, especially something bad or embarrassing, that it's never going to go away, at least not to your satisfaction. And to that end, I kind of wonder why this show needed to be made, because I can't imagine Pamela Anderson watching this show and going, yes, that's how it felt. I'm so glad that they're putting people in my position. No, I feel very much that she'll be worried that the show is going to make more people go out and want to see the tape. And it's just going to make her forced to relive a part of her history that she would rather not live. So to me, I kind of wish the show hadn't been made once more. Again, me not watching it is not going to spare her. But I kind of wish that the showrunners had the self-awareness to say, maybe this isn't our story to tell. But speaking specifically of this episode, like I said, I think it's interesting. It kind of comes at it from two angles, that you have both Pam and Tommy and Rand Gautier and Uncle Manty gradually coming to this realization of their prospective situations. In the case of Rand, it's this realization that he might not be on as firm footing with this tape as he thinks he is. There's this really interesting scene where he's really affronted and angry and feels that his rights have been breached because he finds out that someone is selling black market copies of the tape on a street corner. And of course, there's this conversation between him and this dude where he's trying to convince the dude that somehow the guy doesn't have the right to sell this tape and that he does. And gradually realizing, now wait a second, why is it okay for me to do this but not for them? What right do I actually have? And the lack of self-awareness there up till this point is pretty telling. It's also interesting him gradually realizing that, okay, they're going to be undercut by the black market, so that's a problem, but also that he's not going to be able to remain anonymous. Like, he's really, really concerned that Uncle Manty, has this other guy packaging these tapes in the studio, as if that's going to, make it so that he can no longer be anonymous. But that was ever going to be the case. How did he ever think that he was going to be able to keep his name from coming out? How did he think this was going to work out? And, there's also indications, obviously there's physical danger to him. Now he's continually running from Tommy Lee's acquaintances, who seem to be biker gangs primarily. So he's got that violent threat to himself. But he also has this PI who's threatening him, and who knows what he did. So things are not looking good on that front. But also, he's also, you see Uncle Manty saying that he's going to go overseas to get some financial things sorted out with the bank account where they're funneling all the cash from this enterprise. And it's pretty obvious, I feel, to most viewers what's going to happen, that Rand is going to end up with nothing, that Uncle Manty is going to take the money and run, as it were. So you could have kind of predicted this outcome. Someone, in the last episode said that no one has ever gotten rich off of a sex tape. And I think those words are going to be prophetic by the time that this show ends. But we'll see. They've definitely taken pains to make Rand a somewhat sympathetic character. Whether he should be or not, I'm sure some of that is Seth Rogen playing this character, because Seth Rogen is such an everyman that you want to like this character. But they have taken pains to humanize him and to show his motivations. And I feel that is particularly true with his relationship with Taylor Schilling's character, who we find out this episode he needs to get enough money to afford a divorce from. And the circumstances of their marriage and whether it was a real marriage or not remain to be told. But I imagine that's going to get some exploration before this season is over. Otherwise, this is the first episode not directed by Craig Gillespie. And I don't really feel like it showed that much. Like, I think he's a very cinematic director, but I think that TV shows these days, they usually only need a really, really talented director for the first episode or the first couple episodes to set the tone. But then the production crew and everyone is in place, and they're basically able to mimic the style of that director to good effect. But this episode is directed by Lake Bell, an actress first and now a writer and director. And she acquits herself well. I didn't notice any major dip in quality from the previous 3 episodes, even though she's a less known director, generally speaking, better known for her acting. I was interested to see if there was more of a female perspective behind the lens with her directing. I don't know that really was the case. I did feel like there might have been a little bit less objectification of Pamela this episode, but from a story perspective, it still largely seemed focused on Tommy and on Rand to me. We did get some insights into how this invasion of privacy would feel to Pamela, but I would say they were kind of generic insights. This episode kind of starts off with Tommy Lee discovering that the safe has been missing. I thought that was kind of a really, really funny insight into their lives, that this safe could be missing for weeks, months even, before he noticed, because, my wife would notice if I moved her jacket from one side of the closet to the other, but an entire safe could go missing, and their lives are so cluttered and luxurious that Tommy Lee didn't even notice for months. But you see some generic insights, I feel, into Pamela this episode. You hear, how it was hard for her to get respect in the workplace before, because, people kind of just viewed her as someone who was only valuable because of her sex appeal. And, this sex tape is going to undo any amount of credibility that she had built up for herself in the workplace. You see the crew members watching it on set. Maybe this is based on a true event, and if it is, then I stand corrected, but I kind of doubt that they would be doing that brazenly. But what do I know? But the scene, was very effective. Having Pamela hear these intimate moments just being played in a public venue where all these men who, she has to work with can see it. And, just how humiliating that would be for her. I think that was a very, very telling scene. I also felt, this dawning realization on her part, as I said, that this can't be put back in the bag. I've always thought that this show was really interesting when it delves into people's lack of understanding of the internet at the time. And this moment when she's having a conversation with Tommy Lee about the web, and that they don't have it just because they have a computer, and then they go to a public library to look up this site where the tape is being sold. I thought that was one of the highlights of the episode personally. And this moment, where they're looking up this pornographic site on a public library computer, and there's no, blocking it or anything from internet filters and such. And it's funny just how much times have changed. But just in general, like they gave, some humanity to Pamela with this fact that she wants to have a child, and there's this miscarriage that takes place over the episode, which you could argue is from the stress of this tape being released. But, that's generic stuff. Like, a lot of women want to have children. A lot of women go through miscarriages. I feel like these are facts that you could find out about her on Wikipedia. And I did research her on Wikipedia and find out these facts, but I don't think they necessarily give me a hugely greater level of insight into Pamela Anderson, the person. And likewise, when she says to Tommy that it's different for her as a woman that this tape has come out, that men are going to be congratulating him. He's cool because he's in a sex tape, but for her, everyone's going to think that she is loose, that she's a whore. It's interesting that, that's very telling, the way that society has treated women differently than men throughout time. And again, like these are interesting things to explore, don't get me wrong, and well worth exploring. I just don't know that it gives a whole level of insight into Pamela Anderson and how she specifically felt. Now, they don't really know because obviously they weren't able to consult her. Which leads me to my theory that part of the reason maybe that I am not getting as much humanity from Pamela Anderson as in this show as from Rand and Tommy is because they're more afraid of getting her wrong than they are these others two, because she is a victim here, whereas these other two, they did enough troubling things that it's okay to portray them more detailed. Like, they're not afraid of getting these guys wrong and making them look bad or misrepresenting them because these guys had so many issues, so they're not as worried about, misrepresenting them. But with her, because she's a victim, because she was someone who, really didn't want all this to come out, they probably feel like they shouldn't speculate as much as to what she was like or what her feelings were. But this leaves me feeling like the show doesn't really know who the real Pamela Anderson was, which makes for less compelling television, in my opinion. So those are my thoughts on this episode of Pam and Tommy. For what they are worth, let me know what you thought in the comments. If you're interested in seeing my upcoming reviews of Pam and Tommy and other shows, please consider subscribing to the channel. And as always, thank you so much for watching.